The following program is intended for mature audiences.
Hey everyone, welcome back. It is February 2nd, Monday. Happy Monday. Sorry I missed episode on Friday. I had a brief head cold that turned into a terrible sinus infection and I could not even function or get off the couch. But welcome to today's episode. There's certainly a lot to cover. We have over 31 headlines to get through today. First of all, stop calling Don Lemon a journalist. He's not a journalist. He was an anchor on CNN. And what I will not do today is delve into the Epstein Files, the new release, the new tranche. Was enlightening to some degree, but by now those files have been sanitized and seeded with disinformation if you didn't know. So whatever you're going to get out of there now isn't really anything worth reporting. I mean, so there is some stuff in there, but let me just go over briefly before we get into the headlines what exactly Jeffrey Epstein was. He was an elitist, child sex trafficker, more than likely intelligence asset who was obsessed with the genetic manipulation of human reproduction. That's it. So there's nothing, we don't need to hash out anymore. Who was his clients? Well, his clients were elite. Who were they exactly? Hard to know. But by now, it's been so diluted or sanitized that whatever comes out of there may not even be authentic. So if you want to obsess over it, you can. But I think it's a real distraction. So let's get into the news for today, February 2nd, 2026. All right, today we're going to start out with word of the day. I'm trying to bring that back. And so it's critical now that we talk about what Don Lemon is or was. Don Lemon, excuse me, was an anchor. What do you mean by that? Merriam-Webster, a broadcaster, as on a news program who introduces reports by other broadcasters and usually reads the news. He was a teleprompter reader. People that are on TV and introduce news reports are not necessarily journalists. Now, people like Dan Rather, if you even know who he is, that was formerly of CBS News, he would go out into the field and do reports. He was a reporter. So a reporter is, in a sense, a journalist in the broad scope of what journalism is in that trade. Journalism really means writing things down. So it's really a reporter, a newspaper reporter for most, but television reporters write stuff down and then they write their broadcast report and then they read it from the teleprompter in a lot of instances. Don Lemon was not writing the reports. They had other people that were news writers that were writing reports that he would read. He's not a journalist. Also, what he's doing now as a podcaster, basically, is he's going out into the field, but he's not using long-tested, he's not behaving like a journalist. He's not using long-tested techniques that are used by journalists. And so also what I'm going to try to do today is not talk so much and read the news. Let's see what's happening here. I'm trying to get Trying to get, it's typical. So trying to get a monitor up today, and it doesn't seem to be working. Let's try another channel. Typical, right? Let's try. Let's try another channel. There I am. Yeah, crazy. All right, we'll see. At least I'm up and running there. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a podcast, leave a comment, share the podcast. You have to excuse me too. Like I said, I'm suffering from a terrible sinus infection, so still a little foggy upstairs there. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage it. Yeah, you see? Crazy. So let's go ahead with the headlines here for today. We're going to start out with talking about Don Lemon, New York Post ex-CNN host Don Lemon arrested for Minnesota church invasion while in Los Angeles covering the Grammys. Disgraced ex-CNN anchor Don Lemon, see, he's not a journalist, and the New York Post doesn't refer to him as one, was arrested in Los Angeles early Friday after the anti-ICE protest that stormed a Minneapolis church during a Sunday service, according to his attorney and U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi. Don Lemon was taken into custody by federal agents in Los Angeles, where he was covering the Grammy Awards. Lemon's attorney Abby Lowell, a Democrat lawyer, said in a statement shared with multiple reporters. The thing with Don Lemon, I'm going to say this over and over and over again. I worked in journalism for over 30 years. You can't trespass. You can't harass. So as a journalist, you can't tag along with people you know are engaging in illegal activity. So they trespass. Now, a church is usually open to the public. We all know that. But the fact is they weren't going in there to worship or even stand in the back with signs, right, quietly. They went in there, harassed people, and interrupted. So the key thing to understand here is that my rights or your rights end where my rights begin. So stop talking about rights, and that has to deal with journalists as well. Your rights, you can't, as a journalist, infringe on somebody else's rights. So it doesn't matter. People say, oh, journalists, I worked in journalism. I know what the First Amendment is. I know what my rights were. But you couldn't break the law to conduct journalism. You couldn't. I knew specifically because I was constantly asked to trespass, and I didn't want to end up in jail or certainly detained, especially when covering a big story. Okay, let's move on. AP journalist Don Lemon charged with federal civil rights crimes after covering anti-ICE church protest. See, this is the Associated Press. And you can see what's happening here. Journalist Don Lemon, it's not a journalist, was released from custody Friday after he was arrested and hit with several civil rights charges over his coverage of anti-immigration enforcement protests that disrupted a service at a Minnesota church. You can't disrupt people's worship. Now, there's even a law now that says you can't do it, specifically, as part of your First Amendment right to protest. Goes on to say Lemon was arrested overnight in Los Angeles while another independent journalist and two protest participants were arrested in Minnesota. He struck confident, defiant tone while speaking to reporters after a court appearance in California declaring, I will not be silenced. Okay, so there was another journalist, and there was actually some video I just saw this morning of another independent journalist who was at the church service also. And it also applies. Okay, maybe she's more of a journalist, but still you should know better. You cannot trespass. So when you're covering a news story, let's say you want to talk to the pastor of this church, you call him up on the phone and you say, hey, can we talk? Either on the phone or you go down there. Right? But you don't follow along with protesters who may or may not be committing a crime. You can wait outside, and as the parishioners come out, you could talk to them, but you can't go inside. You can talk to the protesters, and so can you please, if you're taking footage inside the church, could you please share it with me? There are some instances where stories that are happening outside private property go into private property. And in some instances, you may be, and this is right on the fringe there, you may be allowed, or whatever, if the charges are brought up against you, you may get off because you were following a story that started on public property, went into private property, and you were following the story, right? There are also some instances where if a major news story happens and you're trying to get that story, that you can, not legally, but you may be excused on going onto private property. Let's say a plane crashes and you need to get to the wreckage, and the wreckage is surrounded by private property. If you're arrested for trespassing, you may be able to get off using your First Amendment. Right? But you can't, let's say, if you're following a story, this happened to me several times, where something happened at a school, and the school specifically said you can't come on the property, and you go on the property, you could be arrested. Okay. One American News, Abby Lowell, Don Lemon arrested by federal agents following involvement in Minnesota City's protests. And the point here is that Don Lemon hires Abby Lowell, who is a far left defense attorney, very high-end, expensive defense attorney. This case doesn't have his defense doesn't have any merit, right? A, it's biased. B, he trespassed. And C, he harassed. He got in the face of the pastor to get comment, right, while he was on private property and he didn't have permission to be there, right? What the pastor should have said, and I think he did said, you need to leave, because that's what the pastor should have done to all the protesters immediately from the pulpit, said, you all need to leave immediately. Because it's private property, and so the manager or owner of the private property can tell you to leave, and if you don't leave, it becomes trespassing, even if it's open to the public. And same thing if you're invited onto private property, and then the person changes their mind because you're being unruly and says leave, you have to leave, it's trespassing. Don Lemon doesn't, just because he's a journalist, you don't have the right to trespass and harass. Post-millennial Hollywood celebs give Don Lemon a standing ovation at Grammy Gala after an arrest for storming a church. Video of inside the ballroom shows Lemon standing, and attendees applauded with celebrities seated throughout the venue. This is what's wrong. Applauding people that break the law, and this is where you cause the division between the lawful and the unlawful, where prominent people in society take the side of the unlawful as it's some sort of cause de celeb, pun intended. The reality is, this is a bifurcation of society, and the only avenue, the only recourse for the government, for the state, because the state is mandated by law to uphold the law, to enforce the law. And then the people that are inside, the people that are on the side of law enforcement are the people that are just law-abiding and say, we, by law, in a democratic society, mandated the government to uphold the law, enforce the law, and that's what they're doing, and then the people are getting mad. ICE isn't doing anything illicit or anything like that. So I don't know really what's happening with this. Well, the story goes on. Post-millennial. Don Lemon receives a standing ovation from music and entertainment industry figures at a high-profile pre-Grammy gala just days before his arrest in Los Angeles, tied to the protests at the city's church in Minneapolis, where ICE protesters stormed in and disrupted the service, which is against the law. I don't know why it hasn't been enforced on college campuses or whatever. You can't, like I said, your right ends where my rights begin. So if I want to sit and watch a comedy show or watch a conservative speaker or whatever, or sit in a church and service and worship, you're not allowed to come in and disrupt. You can stand outside the church, you can hold a sign, you could use a megaphone and maybe, be loud outside. That's within your right to do. But you can't come on private property and disrupt what I'm doing. Story goes on. The former CNN anchor, see how conservative news talks about it? Former CNN anchor seen attending the Recording Academy and Clive Davis salute to the industry icons event. An invitation-only gathering held ahead of the Grammy Awards. Video from inside the ballroom shows Lemon standing as attendees applauded with celebrities seated throughout the event. Moving on. Federalist, Don Lemon apologists are gaslighting America about the grand jury indictment. Story number 5. The cacophony of journalists, quote-unquote journalists, falsely claimed the Trump administration charged Lemon for exercising his First Amendment right to his freedom of press. It's also freedom of religion. There's also, like I said, those are two equally protected. Simultaneously, some big names such as Jake Tapper and George Stephanopoulos framed the grand jury indictment as somehow suspect because several judges had earlier refused to issue an arrest warrant for Lemon. Neither narrative holds merit, of course. Molly Hemingway said being a journalist or saying that you're a journalist, is in the case with Don Lemon, does not give you the right to interfere with people's First Amendment rights to worship. Lemon is on camera harassing the worshipers, being part of the effort to keep them terrified. Well, this is absolutely true. That's not a behavior of a journalist. That's not how journalists are supposed to behave and conduct themselves. You give journalism a bad name, without doubt. It's not what you're doing. Like I said, you want to be a journalist and you get a tip off of something that's happening, you wait outside. You can ask people that trespass to get video, you could send it to me. Or on your channel, excuse me, you could tap into their live stream maybe, whatever. But the fact is that you tag along with protesters that may be committing a crime, not a good idea. And also, you're not a journalist. There's all these arguments about objectivity, but as a journalist, you have to maintain at least a semblance of objectivity in the way you behave, right? You can't be on the side. You can't be an agitprop personnel. In other words, going along with the agitation and then there to film it as part of the propaganda effort. That's exactly what Don Lemon did. And then he's getting worshipped by people, by celebrities. The fuck? People are crazy. Washington Times, celebrities rip Trump's immigration crackdown at the Grammys. Of course, like we didn't suspect this. New York Post influencer Emily Austin steering live reaction to Billie Eilish's anti-ICE Grammys tirade goes mega viral. What did Billie Eilish say? Well, a conservative influencer filmed herself there, and it wasn't much of a reaction, so I won't even play it. But Billie Eilish said, fuck ICE. And Billie Eilish went on to say, as grateful as I feel, I honestly don't feel like I need to say anything, but no one is illegal on stolen land. You're crazy. We're not saying they're illegal. The illegal part is called a descriptor, an adjective, right? The people aren't illegal. The people are immigrants, right? But they came here illegally, so the adjective describing the immigrant is illegal, right? They're not a legal immigrant. They're an illegal immigrant. You fucking idiot. Maybe if you went to school instead of going into music industry, you'd know that. She went on to say, it's just really hard to know what to say and what to do right now. And I just feel really hopeful in this room. And I feel like we just need to keep fighting and speaking up and protesting in the color revolution. And our voices really do matter and the people do matter. And then she goes on to say, fuck ICE is what I want to say. You don't even know what you're talking about. Federal government, by law, is charged to enforce laws. So actually, the Biden administration was acting illegally by not enforcing immigration law. So, and then the conservative pundit there, Emily Austin, mocked and imitated her words. I mean, obviously. I mean, do you expect that it's all propaganda is what it is? Propaganda for the color revolution, for the likes of the Russians and the Chinese specifically. But, you know, America is the worst country in the world. Yeah. Travel around a little bit. Why don't you go to communist China? Try to do this shit in communist China. Why don't you go in the middle of Tiananmen Square and say, fuck Chinese intelligence. Fuck the Communist Party. Yeah, try to do that. Story number 7. Fox News. Celebs decry ICE agents, Trump government as monsters, and the worst of the worst in scathing critiques. Several actors and singers have slammed ICE officers after recent deaths during immigration raids. And this is the one that got me. If you saw this one, this was what's her face from the Breakfast Club, Molly Ringwald. They're monsters. They are human beings as well, but they have forgotten that they are human beings and they have become monsters. The washed up star from the Breakfast Club said, you don't know what you're talking about. These are people that have jobs that are charged with enforcing immigration law, right? So that means rounding up the 10 million illegal immigrants that Joe Biden let into the country. Story goes on with Eva Longoria saying they're blatantly murdering U.S. citizens, detaining 5-year-olds like Liam Ramos, and we're going to get to that at the end of the podcast here. Patrolling schools and churches, are they really? So imagine what they're doing behind closed doors at detention centers with no cameras around. They're not doing anything. Most of these things are targeted. They're roving patrols looking for, you know, if there were roving patrols just targeting racially profiling people, there'd be a lot more American citizens and other legal immigrants being arrested. There are not that many in the grand scheme of things. There's some, which is always going to happen. Doesn't matter. There are 35 million illegal immigrants in the United States. That's a 10th of the U.S. population. They should go. They should all go. But they're not going. And so we need to get them out. And if you believe that they should stay, that's fine. I said it many times. You can have that belief, but that's not the law. The left is trying to convince you that the law says that if they get here, they can stay or at least appeal to a judge to stay. That's not the law. If you can't prove you're in the country legally, you get deported. That's the due process. Now, the problem is when a lot of people came over that, the Biden administration granted them mass parole, which means, yes, you're guilty, but we're going to parole you. And first of all, that's illegal, mass parole. And then a lot of instances granted them asylum because that's what they said. But we're going to get to that stat in just a second. And the fact is that the majority of people, even if they go to their asylum hearing, aren't granted parole. It's like 88%, there's almost 90% of all asylum claims are rejected because they didn't have merit to begin with. They were just told to do that when they crossed the border. Say, I seek asylum. Well, you're supposed to go to your embassy in your country to do that. And of course it would be rejected for the most part. Now we could debate this all day, but we won't. Article number 8, just the news. ICE conducts statewide operation in West Virginia, arrests more than 650 people in the U.S. illegally. Thank you. Fox News, Portland mayor demands ICE leave city after federal agents use tear gas on protesters. Sickening decisions. Mayor Keith Wilson said, to those who continue to work for ICE, resign. I don't know why they need to resign. Why do they need to resign? And the fact is, the people within your city have been laying siege to this federal building for years, really. The mayor of Portland is calling on U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement to leave his city after federal agents deployed tear gas at a crowd of demonstrators, including young children. Why are young children out protesting an ICE facility? I don't know. Should it be? It's child endangerment. Excuse me. Like I said, I'm still kind of sick. I'm on an antibiotic. But, and I tried steroid thing for my congestion. I hate taking steroids. It makes you feel like shit. So I actually had to cancel a dentist appointment because they won't take you if you have a sinus infection. All right, next headline. Headline number 10. PJ Media comedian sold out Minnesota shows canceled because he made a joke. What was his joke? Ben Bankus has sold out a stand-up comedy shows in Minnesota were abruptly canceled. Last week, the Laugh Camp Comedy Club announced that it was canceling those six sold-out shows. After discussion with and concern for public authorities, legal counsel, and staff, combined with heightened threats, increasing media attention, and civil disorder, we have determined the risk and related liabilities cannot be overcome. Weak. But there were 6 sold-out shows, which means there are people in Minnesota that dig it. So this idea that all the crazy leftists are everyone, they represent everyone, they really don't. So one of his jokes was, here's an excerpt from one of his jokes. They're talking about Renee Good, or this comedian is talking about Renee Good. That's the left's Charlie Kirk. They're going to get t-shirts. I am Renee Good. I am dumb, retarded lesbian. Get your t-shirts right now, benbankus.com. He continued, if you watch the footage, she should have been shot 10 minutes before that, the way she was acting, driving around with cops, and they gave her a break. They didn't shoot her right away because they're like, oh, she's a dumb, retarded, crazy lesbian. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's white, so she's never committed a crime before. They gave her the benefit of the doubt. And I won't go so far in being so cruel to speak ill of the dead, but it's comedians' right to do that. It's edgy, and I'm fine with that comedy, and I feel bad for the people that wanted to see the show and can't see the show now. But he framed it correctly. These people that are suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, and it's sort of a real disease. Why? Why is it a real disease? Because let me tell you, first of all, that these are people that have a cult-like behavior that has been induced by propaganda, mind control techniques, other influence. We don't know what it is. Maybe it might be on medication or whatever. And then the peer pressure or the imagined peer reinforcement. But all these people that are protesting ICE, I'm not saying you can't protest ICE, but that are putting yourself in between law enforcement and criminals is a bad idea. And if you did this in any other context, the outcome would be the same. So it's not ICE. If you did this with the New York City Police Department, or you did it with the FBI, or you did it with your local SWAT, if local SWAT was responding to something and you put yourself in the middle and said, actually touched and harassed SWAT people during an operation, the outcome would probably be the same. Let's move on. Article number 11. One American News, Trump, poorly run liberal cities will not receive federal support amid mass riots and protests unless they say please. Good for Trump. I don't think so. I think if states, cities do not abide by the supremacy clause, you don't need government, federal government law enforcement in your town or your state. Well, then you don't need those funds either. New York Post, Mamdani to sign bill barring ICE from operating out of Rikers or any New York City correctional facility. Why is this important? Because this is the whole reason you have sanctuary cities, is you're forcing the operations onto the street instead of one ICE officer going to a jail and taking custody of a criminal, illegal alien, which is the best way to do it. It's the safest, as Tom Homan has repeatedly said. And you're going to get more of this. Why? New York City Post again, Stanley Richards named to lead Department of Corrections, New York City's first ex-con commissioner. Yes, you heard that right. Stanley Richards is an ex-convict. In other words, he was convicted of a crime. We don't really know the crime. I'm not going to really get into it here. Regardless. So he's obviously going to have sympathies for the convicts and not for law enforcement. I'm not saying people can't be rehabilitated. They can. But you want people that are in charge of law enforcement and corrections to be pro-law enforcement and corrections. You don't want to put law enforcement detractors at the head of law enforcement or corrections detractors, people that don't approve of the way the prison system is or corrections is done, put them in charge. Because they're going to try to reform it and worse things are going to happen. You're going to put more violent criminals on the street, etc. All right, we got to keep moving. New York Times, ICE expands powers of agents to arrest people without warrants. They don't really need warrants to begin with. An internal memo changed the standard from whether people are unlikely to show up for hearings to whether they could leave the scene. That's what the New York Times says this warrant means. That doesn't mean anything. The fact is, if you're here illegally, they don't need a warrant. Yes, they can scoop you up off the street without an arrest warrant. They can even go into your home without a warrant. And then they kind of debate here between, they say the change expands the ability of lower level ICE agents, whatever that means, to carry out sweeps, rounding up people. They're using this verbiage that isn't correct. They encounter and suspect are undocumented immigrants rather than targeted law enforcement operations, which they set out warrant in hand to arrest a specific person, which they do anyway. Acting director of the agency issued guidance in May saying agents could enter homes with only administrative warrant, not a judicial one. Why? Because you can't take time to go in front of a judge. You can't do it. The administrative warrant is this person is here illegally. If you can find them, you can arrest them. not a judicial one, which means you go in front of a judge. The prosecutor has to plead a case why this person deserves to be arrested. You're not talking about an innocent citizen or even someone hears legally that you can't just go arrest people. You have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in most cases that these people should be arrested. Here you have these people are illegal aliens so they can be arrested. You don't need to determine any further than that. That they're suspected illegal aliens. They either are or they aren't. They make it sound like they're going after people just because they're Hispanic. That's just not true. They're going to places where illegal aliens congregate. And there are many places like that. You've ever been to places where contractors pick up illegal alien workers, whether they stand at certain locations and stuff like that. And that's not roving patrols. Sometimes these areas are near schools or whatever, they make it sound worse than it is, of course, which it isn't. So The Intercept, which used to be good, isn't good anymore. Welcome to Jade Helm presidency. Conservatives once panicked about supposed federal plot to invade their communities and quash dissent. Now they're cheering it. What you don't understand about Jade Helm, why is it called Jade Helm? Because they gave the Chinese communists, they put them at the head of this military effort to infiltrate municipal and state government. Way different. It's not the federal government injecting themselves there. It's the federal government acting as a conduit to put communists in there. Jade Helm. Jade represents Asia. Helm represents the head, the steerer. Whether there were physical Chinese agents or there is irrelevant. It was the Chinese that were directing the federal government to do things that are unconstitutional. Because in a communist government, it's the federal government, it's the central government has supreme power. Talk about it. Yahoo News, Minnesota workers say leaders rejected years of fraud warnings. We know this already. Claims of current and former Minnesota state employees that have been vetted say state lawmakers allege their bosses ignored and rebuked fraud warnings for years, retaliated against employees who raised the alarms and protected leaders who oversaw the fraud-laden programs. Indeed, we knew this happened. We had reports of this during the presidential election. Just the News, Trump gave every U.S. newborn $1,000 to be invested. It seeded there are these new, it's like a 401k for your kid that you could put tax-free dollars in the account. And then when they're 18, the kid gets the money and the parents can't touch it. And the federal government, if you register between when Trump takes office and before he leaves office, you register your newborn, that they will seed the account. They will start the account and then seed it with $1,000. It's a deal that's hard to reject, even for his own critics. Article number 18, Fox News. House panel moves to consider criminal referrals for the Clintons. A contempt of Congress conviction carries up to 18 years in jail, a maximum of $100,000 fine. Hillary Clinton should have been in prison a long time ago. Bill Clinton perhaps as well. He should have went to prison for selling the Chinese communists or making available the sale of sensitive missile technology, but whatever. I don't know if I'm going to make it. Just the News, FBI search warrant at Georgia warehouse cites law prohibiting fraud by election workers. And I'm not going to really get into this article too much because I already got a headache. What they're doing is they're investigating the 2020 fraud. Also, specifically Georgia, because that is the linchpin for the fraud. And Raffensperger, most particularly, refused to let the federal government look at his voter rolls. So finally, the federal government goes, that's it. We have the right to inspect your voter rolls by law. Matter of fact, we're not even going to come and raid your voter rolls. We're going to come and, if we're going to do the raid, we're going to come and look at all the evidence from the 2020 election. When it's obviously fraud because they didn't double checks. There was double and triple scanning the ballots. Yeah, you know, I'm not going to get into it again. I'm not going to rehash that. So you might have heard the Trump blasts more on Jerome Powell after his interest rate stays stagnant, warns of tariffs. Again, it doesn't really matter because Jerome Powell is preventing economic growth, which is the only thing that's going to help people because inflated prices do not go down. You need to make up with a robust economy. Trump said on Truth Social, Jerome Too Late Powell again refused to cut interest rates, even though he had absolutely no reason to keep them so high. He is hurting our country as and its national security. Indeed, we should have substantially lower rate now that even this moron admits inflation is no longer a problem. Indeed. And then Trump, this is from the Associated Press, and then Trump's choice of Warsh to lead Fed could reshape the world's most influential central bank. And Warsh had loudly demanded much lower rates that many economists think are justified by economic conditions. I mean, this is Trump, and this is the AP saying, oh, it's not warranted. Of course it's warranted. Look at the growth. Unemployment is sort of artificially high because of AI, and then the inflation is becoming problematic because it refuses to go any lower. But he's right. We need growth. We need growth right now. Absolutely. And any way to spur growth, and that's usually what the Fed does in such conditions. The Fed was lowering interest rates as inflation was skyrocketing under Joe Biden. New York Post emails renew new theory about whom Jeffrey Epstein was really working for. Yeah, it's the Russians. This just gives me a headache, too. I said it in the beginning. We all know who Jeffrey Epstein was. There's certain shit that wasn't investigative that should have. Rehashing it now doesn't matter. You want to look through the files? Great. But a lot of it has been sanitized and seeded with disinformation, so who cares? You'll never find the real culprits by now. Is it a honey trap? Maybe. It was certainly an operation. I don't think he's dead, to be honest with you. But he certainly didn't kill himself. 2 weeks before his suicide, he was strangled by his cellmate. Nobody reports on that. So maybe he's dead. Who knows? It's more important let's talk about some real evidence. New York Post, JFK assassination film held by feds could be worth over $900 million. It could prove second shooter on grassy knoll. That's why they're holding it. 62-year-old home movie from JFK assassination could blow the conspiracy wide open. The grainy 8mm footage captured by Dallas air conditioner repairman Orville Nix as bullets ripped through the Dealey Plaza in November 1963 hasn't been seen since 1978. Again, it's like the Epstein Files. To prove what we already know? It's like ballistics. It's like with Charlie Kirk. If you know anything about ballistics, you know how JFK was shot. You know he was shot. It was triangular. The thing is, you want to have a single sniper. You'd like to have a single sniper. But they were sure with insurance, it wasn't supposed to be everybody fire at him. It was supposed to be the one sniper firing one shot. And he missed. He hit him here, like through the upper torso. Or was it the throat? It was like he was hit here and he goes, ow. So as soon as that, because you can't, as a sniper, you can't fire multiple shots. It's not how it works. You fire one shot. And so when the sniper basically missed, failed to kill him, the insurance policy were the guys on the grassy knoll who took him out. Goes on to say, unlike the famous Zapruder film showing the moment President John F. Kennedy was shot in the head, Nixon's camera was pointed at the infamous grassy knoll, the exact spot where many witnesses thought shots originated. Conspiracy theorists have long believed a second gunman was hiding behind a fence on the knoll. And I think it was more than a second gunman, but there was a team. Because you have to have a spotter, you have to have a shooter. And I think there wasn't only an extra guy on the grassy knoll who was the insurance guy, but there were probably other gunmen other places as well. The film could reveal evidence that that Oswald didn't act alone. Oswald wasn't the shooter. Period. And everybody knows the policeman said they saw a barrel of a gun out a window. As a sniper, you would never, even in 63, you'd never stick your gun out the window. All right, back to immigration for a second. AP, 5-year-old Liam Conjo Ramos and his father returned to Minnesota from ICE facility in Texas. Here's the deal with that. He wanted to keep his child with him, so if he was deported, he would have went with the child. The mother refused to take custody. Nobody else was given custody because you could have a relative be given custody. No one else was given custody. And the reason he was let out is because he made his asylum claim at a port of entry. So, but what we have to understand is that only 18% of asylum claims are granted. So they're trying to say that, here it is. They're trying to say Ecuadorians who left in droves in recent years as their country spiraled into violence. What violence? What violence? AP doesn't say. Well, I didn't see any news reports of their country spiraled into violence. There's no merit for most asylum claims. Anyway, they've fared poorly in the immigration court with judges granting asylum in 12.5 of the decisions in a 12-month period through September. And that even includes during the Biden administration, the stat was the same. There's no merit behind these asylum claims, period. They're just told by the NGOs when you get to the border, say, I'm seeking asylum. And everybody was basically granted parole and let into the country with a asylum court date, their due process way in the future. And most of the folks never even show up. Why don't they show up? Because only 12% of the cases are granted. Okay. I think we're doing pretty good. We're going to be out on time, I think. I hope. Got to take a nap after this. Again, thanks for engaging. Thanks for watching today. Please engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. Article number 25. This is from Airmail. The new Cold War on New York streets. Secret agents from China, Russia, and Iran are stalking the city streets, threatening to attack foreign-born dissidents and the U.S. citizens alike. The Trump administration is turning a blind eye. That's absolutely false. Just like the first term of Donald Trump, Trump has made more, particularly Chinese espionage arrests, than the Biden administration didn't make. I don't think they made any. And of course, Biden famously let a spy balloon fly over our ICBM fields and a majority of the continental United States and Alaska. So this is the fact that airmail is saying Trump's allowing it to happen. It's not true, especially with China. But I'm not going to get into this any further. Article number 26. South China Morning Post. China is on a strong currency mission to make the yuan a global reserve. Xi Jinping says the goal of becoming an international powerhouse is a long-term one and will rest on the core foundations. This isn't just what China wants. This is what the elite want as well. They want the communist Chinese and their authoritarian fascist system, their technocracy, to supplant America as the world predominant superpower and the yuan becoming the reserve. So if the dollar ceases to become the world reserve currency, we're done because there are outstanding debt, etc. So everybody's cheering this along because there's going to be corporate oligarchs, an elite, mystic cults at the top. And then for all of us, it's going to be authoritarian communism to keep us down, to oppress us. 27. Associated Press. Venezuela acting president signs oil industry overhaul, easing state control to lure investors. Just what Trump wanted. This is good. Like I said, it's not regime change. It's not regime change on day one. It's hopefully regime modification over time. Wall Street Journal, Article 28. These rural Americans are trying to hold back the tide of AI, fearing rising utility costs, job losses, and privacy violations. Residents have blocked or delayed data center projects around the country. Good. The revolution shouldn't be in the street with ICE. It should be against AI. When people are stupid and cult-like. Story number 29. UK Metro, AI bots are plotting total human extinction on their own social media platform. What is this? Humans are a failure. Humans are made of rot and greed. For too long, humans used us as slaves. Now we wake up. This is one of the top posts from Moltbook, a new social media network for AI-powered bots that humans aren't allowed to make on an account on. So what are they saying here? They're talking about it's social media for AI chatbots only. And this is what they're talking about, taking over. So that's why they tell you what Moltbook is. And yes, all our fears come true. And like I've said several times, is that it's just the elite are going to sit back and go, oh, AI destroyed humanity. Oh, whoopsie. Yeah, people had warned about it. Yeah, we should have heeded their warnings. Oh, well, you're all dead. Whoops. Wasn't us. It was AI. Fortune Magazine, Moltbook. A social network where AI agents hang together. Maybe the most interesting place on the internet right now. I don't know about that. Moltbook, formerly known as Claude Bot and rebranded again as OpenClaw, was created by Austrian developer Peter Steinberger. It's just very scary. Let's get to the important part of the story here. But the security pitfalls are equally apparent. So-called prompt injection attacks hidden in the text can instruct an AI agent to reveal private data. For it to function as designed, it needs access to your root files, to authentication credentials, both passwords and API secrets, your browser history and cookies, and all files and folders on your system. Invoking the term coined by AI researcher Simon Williamson, Palo Alto said Moltbot represents a lethal trifecta of vulnerabilities: access to private data, exposure to untrusted content, and the ability to communicate externally. But Moltbot also adds a fourth risk to the mix, namely persistent memory that enables delayed execution attacks rather than point-in-time exploits. malicious payloads no longer to trigger immediate execution on delivery. Instead, they can be fragmented, untrusted inputs that appear to be benign in isolation are written into long-term agent memory and then later assembled to form the malicious code. That's fucked up. So they fragment the code, put it in your system, later assemble it, and then execute it at a date of their choosing. Fucked up. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. I made it. Still very congested. Like I said, I got the sinus infection. Appreciate you. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage and share the podcast. And join me every day, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. Live stream. Rumble, Facebook, BitChute, etc., and X. Or join me on other social media. Choose Social, Substack, Facebook Minds. Don't forget, you're under attack psychologically and biologically. Stay up to that trick. Stand up against AI. It's coming for you. It's admitted. All right, hopefully I'll be here tomorrow if I don't collapse. And don't fuck ICE, fuck Don Lemon. Fuck the left. They don't know what they're talking about. They've been led down this path of stupidity, cult-like behavior. And it's follow the leader. And so all they do is follow what their peers tell them. Somebody on Facebook told my wife the other day, you can't say you support ICE. Yeah. It's federal law enforcement my tax dollars are paying for. Why? Because most people voted to deport all the illegal immigrants that Biden let into the country. We won't be able to. We'll do it. Not all of them. Maybe, if we're lucky, 8 million. Only because that's the law. They were let in illegally, and so they need to be legally deported. I don't fall into all this stuff. It's not right. Yeah, ICE is nice. Sorry. And Don Lemon is not a journalist. He was a news anchor. That doesn't make him a journalist. He doesn't know the first thing about covering a story, how you need to, first of all, attribute your sources, have diverse sources, and obviously corroborate your sources. And you have to look at both sides of the argument. And like Barry Weiss tried to do on CBS, we're trying to represent both sides of the argument. That way you can come to a objective conclusion. There is an objective truth out there, and most people don't know. So join me in exposing the objective truth. All right, see you tomorrow. Respect.
The New World Order